In this short presentation, we are going to take a look at practical UDL tips for busy instructors. When we get to the end of the presentation, those of you that know something about UDL are probably going to be saying, "Wow, she didn't cover so much of what UDL is about." Those of you that don't know about UDL are going to be saying, "Is that all there is to UDL?" Let's keep in mind that the title of this presentation is Practical UDL Tips for Busy Instructors, which means I'm only going to cover very few elements that you can begin implementing right away. Some of the slides I will read word for word because they convey definitions. I provided or will soon provide your dean with digital copies of the PowerPoint presentation, my handouts, and the Universal Design for Learning guidelines. For those of you who wish to learn more about UDL, refer to the resources in the PowerPoint presentation, read the guidelines, and consider enrolling in the Accessibility 101 class offered by the eLearning Center. What are we going to cover in this presentation? I'll briefly cover the concepts of Universal Design for Learning and how UDL differs from accessibility. We'll spend time on how UDL concepts contribute to an accessible class, how to incorporate alternative formats, and how a busy instructor can get started with UDL. Hopefully, in the workshop, we'll have time for questions at the end. And of course, we must have learning objectives. At the end of this workshop, you will be able to describe UDL, explain the difference between accessibility and UDL, explain how UDL principles contribute to an accessible class, name some alternative delivery formats, and describe how you will address one UDL guideline in a class this quarter. UDL is a scientifically valid framework based on the concept that we design our learning environment to be accessible to all students. The key element here is that the class is designed from inception to be accessible to all students. It is not retrofitted to be accessible. The idea of universal design for learning is actually taken from the work of Ron Mace, an architect who was inspired to design buildings that were truly accessible to all people. The framework provides flexibility in the ways information is presented, in the ways students respond or demonstrate knowledge and skills, and in the ways students are engaged, reduces barriers in instruction, provides appropriate accommodations, supports, and challenges, and maintains high achievement expectations for all students, including students with disabilities and students who are limited English proficient. Let's take a quick look at the difference between universal design and accessibility. Which photo shows UDL and which shows accessibility through accommodation? Were you right? In the first photo, we see an elderly gentleman crossing the street using a walker. If you look behind him, you can see that there are sidewalk cuts that allow him to push this walker smoothly from the sidewalk to the street and back to the sidewalk. These cuts also accommodate strollers, bikes, skateboards, and those wheeled briefcases that all of us are dragging behind us. The sidewalks were designed intentionally to accommodate all users. In the next picture, we are looking at accessibility. The stairway has been retrofitted with a wheelchair ramp. It is accessible to those requiring accommodation for wheelchairs, However, it is not designed to serve the greater population. The ramp may accommodate strollers, but I'm not sure. Perhaps those tracks are too far apart. And I think I might have a devil of a time trying to pull my wheeled briefcase up and down. The tracks look too narrow and too far apart. I'd probably end up carrying it. What about the elderly gentleman with a walker? Do you think it would work for him? Accessibility can be demeaning to some users at times. For example, if they must enter by another door, are limited to certain parts of the building, or need assistance using the accessibility accommodations provided. Universal design for learning is a thoughtful process whereby the needs of all learners are considered in the design of the learning environment. Accessibility flows naturally from UDL. UDL does not necessarily flow from accessibility. UDL takes into consideration the three primary brain networks: recognition networks, strategic networks, and affective networks. Recognition networks encompass the what of learning. They cover how we gather facts and categorize what we see, hear, and read. Identifying letters, words, or an author's style are recognition tasks. To address recognition tasks, we present information and content in different ways. This equates to providing multiple means of representation. Strategic networks are the how of learning. They cover how we plan and perform tasks, how we organize and express our ideas. Writing an essay or solving a math problem are strategic tasks. To address strategic tasks, we differentiate the ways in which students can express what they know. This is covered by multiple means of action and expression. Affective networks are the why of learning. This is how students get engaged and stay motivated. It is how they are challenged, excited, or are interested. These are affective dimensions. To address affective tasks, we stimulate interest and motivation for learning. This equates to multiple means of engagement. Universal Design for Learning guidelines are divided into three sections which correspond to the three networks: recognition, strategic, and affective. Section 1 covers multiple means of representation and is intended to create resourceful, knowledgeable learners. Section 2 covers multiple means of action and expression and is intended to produce strategic, goal-directed learners. Section 3 addresses multiple means of engagement and is intended to create purposeful, motivated learners. Each section contains principles which address a certain concept within that topic. I provided you with a handout with a graphic organizer on one side and a text-based educator workshop on the other. In a few moments, we'll take a look at some of these specific principles. UDL curriculum is intended to help students master learning, that is, to become expert learners. As we saw in a prior slide, these are resourceful, knowledgeable, strategic, goal-directed, purposeful, and motivated learners. The interrelated components of curriculum design using UDL concepts include goals, learning expectations, methods, instructional decisions, approaches, procedures, or routines, materials, media used to present learning content, and what the learner uses to demonstrate knowledge, and assessment, the process that the instructor goes through for gathering information about learners' performance using a variety of methods and materials in order to determine learners' knowledge, skills, and motivation for the purpose of making informed educational decisions. The most important place to start in designing a UDL learning environment is with the outcomes, objectives, and/or goals of the class. Because English 101 is a requirement for graduation in many programs, I selected it, and we will look at one of the outcomes for this particular class. After completing this class, students will be able to think critically and read analytically, carefully interpret and evaluate claims, beliefs, arguments, or issues, reading various texts critically for purposes of interpretation, analysis, synthesis, or evaluation. Let's consider what constructs, that is, knowledge, skills, and abilities, would be assessed in order to determine that the learner has achieved this outcome. Often a problem occurs within the objectives because the materials and the methods introduce additional skills and understanding. For example, if we look at the objectives for this workshop, you are asked to describe UDL. What is the difference between an objective worded as describe UDL versus one worded as write a paragraph describing UDL? Am I assessing your knowledge of UDL or your ability to construct a paragraph? Within the workshop, am I describing, explaining, or modeling how to create a paragraph? Writing a paragraph is construct irrelevant. Describing UDL is construct relevant. Is there any part of this particular outcome which you would consider construct irrelevant? The syllabus is another obvious place to consider in getting started with UDL. For example, don't consider accessibility an afterthought. Place information about support systems, including accessibility, near the top of the syllabus. Include information about how to obtain an accessible copy of the textbook with the information on the textbook. Establish a schedule that explicitly states when assignments are due and when students can expect feedback, both summative and formative. Again, I wish to stress that we are not covering the full scope of UDL design. I selected a couple of elements that are relatively quick fixes. I believe that a great many of you are already providing multiple means of representation and perhaps don't realize that this is a vital component of the UDL classroom. For example, some of the tools used in this short workshop that satisfy UDL principles are my spoken word, the visuals provided through the PowerPoint presentation, the video with closed captions, the handouts were provided on the essential components of UDL, that is the guidelines, the link to additional resources on the last slide of the presentation, and also the digital copies of the presentation and handouts, a document for additional reading on UDL, and a video version of the presentation that will be provided following the workshop. I'll bet that most of you are already providing reading from the text, visual summaries, and audio-video representations. Now, if you're not, this is something you should be thinking about and incorporating. A couple more quick tips that specifically address multiple means of representation. The guidelines indicate we should clarify vocabulary and symbols and promote understanding across languages. Take a look at your class for consistency. What does CH mean? What does CHAP mean? What does CHAPT mean? What about MOD or WK? Here we're talking about chapter, module, and week. Did you know that? The wide variety of abbreviations may mean the same thing to the course designer and can be confusing and demotivating to learners who are not aware of the interchangeability of various abbreviations. Review your syllabus and your class and use consistent terminology for things like chapter, lesson, module, and/or week. Provide a glossary or pop-up dialog box that provides definitions of terminology. If you want to use pop-ups, contact the e-Learning Center for support or research through the Canvas community. Within the section to provide multiple means of action and expression, we find Principle 6.4, which covers enhancing capacity for monitoring progress. Give students the tools they need to understand their progress in successfully achieving the outcomes, objectives, and/or goals for the course. Use the Canvas gradebook and keep it up to date. Build and utilize rubrics. Create checklists. Give annotated examples. Encourage self-assessment. Prompt students to identify the feedback and/or advice they need, and, I'll reiterate here, communicate how and when grading takes place. Section 3 covers providing multiple means of engagement. Principle 8.1 suggests highlighting goals and objectives. One method of doing this is to provide a separate learning guide for each week, unit, and/or module. The guide will outline the specific learning objectives for that unit and how the specific learning objectives for the unit contribute to the achievement of the overall course goals and how they related to the material, assessments, and assignments for that unit. Within the guide include dates, vocabulary, and explanations of the methods, materials, and assessments used. Questions related to self-monitoring can be added to the learning guide for individual consideration. They could be posted to the discussion board for group discussion or added to a quiz, survey, or included in a wiki or a blog. We have really just touched the surface of UDL here. I've tried to give you some ideas about what UDL is and how to get started with it. If you're planning a new class, start with the UDL concepts in mind. If you're working on an existing class, choose one principle to address each term. Ask your students what works for them and where they go to get alternative resources. Share your ideas with colleagues and collect ideas from them. So what is UDL? UDL is a framework that addresses the primary barrier to fostering expert learners within instructional environments, inflexible, one-size-fits-all curricula. What is the difference between accessibility and UDL? UDL addresses the learning needs of all learners and encompasses accessibility. Accessibility provides accommodation to a specific group of learners. It is often a retrofit rather than intentional design. How do UDL principles contribute to an accessible class? UDL principles cover multiple means of representation, multiple means of action and expression, and multiple means of engagement. What are some alternative delivery formats? We looked at audio, video, text-based, and graphic formats. Which guidelines do you plan to address in your class this quarter and how? To learn more about Universal Design for Learning, visit the National Center on Universal Design for Learning.